Creating your own reality. Is it possible for me? I am Jennifer K. Hill, the Consciousness Architect, and I am here to tell you that it's not only possible, it's closer than you might think. Welcome to the show. Hello, friends, and welcome back for another episode of Regarding Consciousness. I am Jennifer K. Hill, and it is a joy, it is fun, it is a privilege to get to bring to you thought leaders, scientists, authors, and brilliant minds from around the world sharing their wisdom on what consciousness is and means to them. Today, we have a new friend joining me who it happens to turn out has my same birthday. So we're birthday sisters, Isabel Tierney. Deep gratitude to all the amazing people who came to bring us together. And Isabel is an extraordinary person who is a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a stress management expert and international speaker and educator. She holds 2 master's degrees, one in international relations from Boston University and another in child development from Tufts University. She also holds an energy healing certificate as well. After running her successful therapy practice for more than a decade, Isabel's life took an interesting turn when burnout led to the loss of her health and her marriage. In response, she developed a transformative methodology aimed at fostering a life of aliveness, inspiration, and joy. This feel good methodology, as it's coined, is a simple, proven map derived from neuroscience, psychology, and spirituality, and has been successfully implemented with diverse audiences from individuals to corporations such as L'Oreal. Since then, she's trained hundreds of people around the world to facilitate the methodology and is committed to helping as many people as possible with her work. Isabel, it's such a pleasure to be here with you. And thank you to, I think it was Christina who connected us, right?
Yeah, that's right. I have to say, the way you just read my bio, it was that you were poised in every sentence and you made every sentence come alive. So often people read bios and they just fly through them. And it was like you were embodying every sentence. So I was feeling myself in every sentence. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, that I take that as a deep compliment from the queen of embodiment herself, Isabel. I really appreciate it. And shout out to Arthur Samuel Joseph, who's joined us before on the show. He's the one who taught me a brilliant technique called visceral language. And if I'll try to drop out of it for a second to give you and the audience a taste, he's the one who taught me a technique called visceral language, versus he is the one who taught me the technique called visceral language. And so kudos to Arthur for having come up with that.
Incredible. I've never spoken to anybody yet about how they said my bio. So that is how much what you did stands out. That's so amazing. Thank you
I
for teaching me something this morning already.
Oh my God, Isabel, I'm blushing. I'm blushing. And yeah, it's consciousness. That's what we're here to talk about. And regarding consciousness, what if we brought the same level of consciousness to every single word we said? One of my favorite teachers and mentors, David Guillaume from the Kabbalah Center, often says, imagine if we taped our mouth for a month and didn't speak a word. What would come out of our mouth would be thoughtful, conscious, and conscientious. And that's the work that you and I and so many of us who are here on the show and out in the world doing this work are here to do. How can we bring our consciousness to every last word we speak and every thought we think and ask ourselves what's worth saying and what's not?
In my methodology, I talk about a human consciousness having 3 zones: red, yellow, green. And the red zone is the stress response, and the green zone is the relaxation response, what I also call the thrive response or well-being. So if we're in the red zone, we are in the stress response. That means our bodies and our brains think we're in danger. And so speaking thoughtfully and consciously and with kindness is literally impossible because our brain thinks we're in danger and can only fight, flight, or freeze. So whenever we're unkind, whenever we're thoughtless, whenever we say things we don't mean, that's a signal that we're in the stress response. And I always say it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And
Mm.
so learning then to bring yourself back to the green zone, and in the green zone, every beautiful sacred intention you just said about speaking, thoughtful, kind, love-based, slow, right? We need to be slow to speak like that, spacious. can only be accessed in the way that I teach it when we are at those frequencies. We can't access them at others. So sometimes people shame themselves a lot for having overreacted. I say, no, it's not your fault. You are in the stress response. You're supposed to do that, but you're actually not in danger. Let's bring yourself back to green and then become the human being you've always wanted to be.
Mhm. I love your methodology so much. I'm a huge advocate of all of the work many of you have heard me share of heart math and other things. Anything that can give us access to our higher brain functioning, to our consciousness, that it begs a whole other question of consciousness versus mind. Though let's imagine that even our consciousness is temporarily unavailable. I'm going to be so bold as to say that because whether we're talking consciousness or mind, when we're in that animalistic state, perhaps I'm going to go a step further and say that our consciousness almost mirrors that more of an animalistic sort of state of being. So it's not to say we don't have access to our consciousness, but perhaps that our consciousness more closely mirrors that of an animal trying to fight, flight, or flee. Try to
Right.
5 times fast. Isabel, what are some of the ways that we can, number 1, recognize when we're in the red? That is one of the biggest things is that conscious awareness, as Arthur calls it. How do we know when we're in the red zone? Because sometimes you're like that cartoon character. I don't know about you. When I say you, I am like that cartoon character where you could fry an egg on my head, but you don't even realize it. Sometimes you are so upset and yet you're just spewing your venom at everybody. How do we bring our attention to it so that way we can move out of the red and back into the green
Yes.
zone?
You said a couple things that I will build upon from what you just said and your question. So one is literally our frontal cortex, which is the rational, the mind part of our brain, is shut down. Actually, all the blood leaves the frontal cortex to be used for fighting, fleeing, or freezing. So we literally don't have access to our conscious mind. But then what I loved is what you said, you held the paradox. You held the paradox of, oh, wow, let's not call that consciousness. That's consciousness in animalistic form. So I love that. I love holding dualism and non-dualism. So in the methodology, probably the most powerful thing that I teach is how to recognize signals that you're either heading or in the red zone. And so I have physiological signals. Some of them include racing heartbeat, constricted muscles, narrowed vision. Usually it's like lots of tightness in the belly. We are meant to fight or freeze. So our body's doing everything it can to get us to that state. Emotionally, if you start noticing anxiety, if you start noticing fear, if you start noticing like irritation, frustration, mentally, if you start noticing thoughts like this is never going to work out, or he's a jerk, or whatever, like negative thoughts. And then finally the relational, I'm thinking you're my enemy, so I'm thinking you're not trustworthy, you're to blame for everything. Marianne Williamson calls the ego the great fault finder. And for me, the ego and actually the red zone are one and the same. So I call the red zone the great fault finder. So if you find yourself judging either yourself or another, that's one of the greatest, or the world, or what your job or your life or whatever it is, that's the greatest signal that you are in the red zone. Because in the green zone, you can still have disappointments in others. You can still, but you don't blame, you don't criticize, you don't judge. So great fault finder is the simple answer to my long explanation.
Okay, great. So, to number 1, I think that you're saying that if we notice we're being judgy bunnies, one of my best friends from childhood calls it, if you're being a judgy bunny,
Love
then
that.
maybe that's a good indicator to pause and just reflect for a moment. So let's say that we notice that we're in that fault making zone, that judgy bunny zone. What's our next immediate step? We're there. I don't like you. I don't like me in that moment. And I am just picking us both to pieces. How do I get out of it?
Yeah, so the methodology then has 3 steps. And the step number 1, and so think of a traffic light. Remember I said red, yellow, green? So that's the feel good scale, which is actually in the shape of a triangle. So if you notice you're in red zone, you stop. So think red lights, stop. and you remind yourself, sometimes just stopping is all you can do. But if you can, you remind yourself that the way you're seeing the world in the red zone is distorted and exaggerated and overly narrowly focused, right? You can't see the big picture. So stop. I say stop and don't believe anything you think, feel, or want to do. Don't believe any of it. Second step is slow down and breathe. So think yellow light. You start reminding your nervous system that you're safe. Where many of us are rarely in danger. So our brain does not need to be telling us we're in danger all the time. So slow down and breathe, 5 to 10 deep abdominal breath. And then I say go, right? Green light, and do a feel good habit. So that's a habit that makes you feel sustainably good and really grounds you into that green zone. So that could be your friend and laughing for a moment. That, whoa, I was about to let Judgy Bunny act out onto my poor husband. Thank God I stopped, I slowed down and breathed, and I called you. It could be doing a few jumping jacks. It could be listening to a song, like something to shift us into a higher frequency. But each step is really important. So don't skip any of them. Stop, slow down and breathe, and go.
I don't remember if it was a conversation you and I were having a couple of weeks ago, Isabel, or if it was somebody else I was speaking to about the role that laughter has to play. It might have been a podcast I was listening to about one of the other things we can do. I used to call it red mist for myself. Years ago, my ex-husband used to affectionately call it the red mist would descend over me, and it was like a fog, and you can't see through it.
You can't see anything.
Yeah,
Yes.
and, like, now my husband, my current husband calls it the Hulk, so he'll be like, "It's okay. Sun's going down, big guy. You're gonna be okay." So, sometimes I've found personally for myself and with people I've worked with too, that when we can almost come up with a little nickname for that side of ourselves, whatever it is, whether it's the Hulk or bitter bunny or whatever it might be, then from that place, you can almost begin to play with it and get out of that reactive zone and into more of the proactive zone. So, say, for example, if you and I were colleagues, we're in the middle of something we're frustrated about. And if I'm like, oh, am I talking to Isabel or am I talking to Tiny Terror or whatever it is? I don't know. I just made that up. Then all of a sudden, that gives you a contextual shift that allows you to have a little more freedom.
Yeah, I love that. And I will say for those people who might be snarky about this, there are times that if I'm really in the red zone and my husband brings out and calls her tiny terror, even if we've agreed upon it when we were in the green zone and lovey-dovey, I'm really like, don't you call me tiny terror. You are. So it's really funny. There are times we just can't get out of the red zone, especially with the person we are in the red zone with right now. So a lot of time, I think one of the smartest things for many of us to do is to get some space, because you really had to be skilled to get out of the red zone into the green zone with the 3 steps. It's easy to do, but when you're really agitated and elevated, it's really hard to do. So yes, it's a good try. I think I call the green zone lens. And so the green zone lens is curiosity, compassion, humor. So humor is a great one. What's the name? But also compassion. When people start doing the spiritual work and then the methodology, they're like, oh, red zone is bad to be. And it's another aspect of consciousness. It's just a secret. It just leads to very different consequences. And so can I love the judgy Isabel? Can I love tiny terror? But while being responsible with that part of me. So we have to be really careful not to hate and shame the part of us that gets reactive, while being responsible with her so that she doesn't actually hurt ourselves or other people.
Mm. That idea, Isabella, of accountability and allowing for all of the parts of ourselves without trying to squash them down. Or what was that game that you used to play, like whack-a-mole, right? When you're a little kid, I remember being at Chuck E. Cheese at 5 years old and you're like whacking that mole down. Sometimes the more you whack the mole, you're just going to get 500 more little mole heads that are going to pop up somewhere else. And that idea of, I think somebody once taught it to me, called parts reconciliation. I may have mentioned it before here on the show. When I did this work years ago, about a decade ago, I was introduced to a part of myself that I did not want to claim. She is called Juicy, and she's like a dominatrix. She is there to make sure you are in your place and you are in your place. And most importantly, that I am in my place and that nobody steps out of line.
Mm.
And it's so tempting to want to alienate, to vilify Juicy or whatever part is in you out there listening, or you, Isabel. And I think that what we have the opportunity to do, should we choose to do it, is to instead dance with the parts, engage with them, allow them their space and time to be expressed, and not try to squash them into oblivion, though allow them to have a voice at the table when we choose rather than being at the effect of them when they choose. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, that's why I grew up with shame as the weapon of choice of my caregivers in order to affect transformation in me. So I have this really big passion about teaching transformation, not using shame, right? And so that this main sentence of the methodology, which is it's not your fault, it's your responsibility, right? I love it because it's like, it's not our fault. The red zone is so over exaggerated in all of us because of evolution. And if we've experienced trauma as children and so it's not our fault who we become, but it is our responsibility to recognize it and then do something about it. So that's one piece I love. The other sentence that changed my life was Janine Roth, who wrote the book When Food is Love.
Oh, I've heard it, yes.
She's incredible. And so she had a sentence. I had an eating disorder. That was my raging self. Came out in an eating disorder and bulimia. And I was in the middle of it and so much shame, right? You can't control it. You can't you hide it from people. It's the biggest dark secret you have. And she had a sentence that said, there's a perfectly good reason for everything we do. And I remember in that moment being so struck, wait, there's a perfectly good reason for my eating disorder. I have shamed her. I have hated her. I've tried to get rid of her. I've tried to ignore her. And that was the first sentence that informed my whole career. Like, how then do I discover the perfectly good reason for any of our parts, even the darkest ones? And they always have a perfectly good reason. It's in response to trauma. Whatever it is, it's evolutionary. And once you discover that, you can be with compassion with that person, that part of you, while taking responsibility, which is not easy to do. It's learning to play with fire. And sometimes people have to be careful. Okay, I'm going to allow my red zone self to come out. Be careful. Go slow, small steps. Allow her a little bit of space because they can be dangerous, those dark parts of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just doing some work with a coaching client on that the other day, and she says, "Is this good? Is it bad?" It's we all have this, of we have these parts, and sometimes we're afraid of it. And so, what is your recommendation of how somebody could begin to do some work with this red zone part of themselves if they wanted to get to know it and do some safe work and baby steps like you're talking about? What are some ways that you found work for your clients?
I'm just sitting with yeah, there are two ways that I work the methodology. One, there's the in the moment, where you recognize through the list of signals where you're at and then practice the 3 steps. And sometimes you have to do that 10 times a day. So that's one way, is like facing that part of us in the moment. And what I love about the methodology, I'm a therapist, right? I spent my whole life understanding the why behind people's are who we are. With the methodology, you don't have to understand even why you went into the red zone in order for you to get out of it. Actually, if you try to understand why am I in the red zone when you're in the red zone, you'll never figure it out. So it's the best thing is get out of the red zone, come back into green, and either move on with your day or, I keep being in the red zone with this person, or when this happens, then let me explore, right? Wow, whenever my husband says this to me, this happens to me. So that's the second way. So there's a short term, actually, you don't have to work with her except to teach her again and again. It's your nervous system to come back to the green zone. And then longer term, if you keep seeing a pattern of a part of you that just really struggles with not being red zone, just start sitting with her and saying, what do you need? What's the perfectly good reason for your being here? And I promise you, when you give those voices space and you ask from curiosity, you can't do it from the place of, I'm asking you why you're here because I want to get rid of you. Like those places, our consciousness knows when we're trying to get rid of anything. So if you have an agenda when you bring your curiosity, hey, I really want to know Judgy Isabel, but you're doing it because you're hoping that will make her disappear, she won't speak to you. But if you really come to that part of you with genuine curiosity, genuine compassion, And then trusting that part being seen will become much less dangerous and much less impulsive, which is what I've seen happen. That's a great secret.
Mm, really powerful, Isabel. And in fact, you reminded me when you were talking about how we create these parts sometimes as a protective or evolutionary or whatever it might be, sometimes in response to trauma. I remember when I first met Juicy, I asked her, I was like, "Oh, Juicy, tell me a little bit about yourself. When did we first connect?" And it was when I was 5 years old and had alcoholic parents and was in a traumatic situation. And she's, if I control every little thing, then no one gets hurt. I need to control the people and the situations. And much like you, that led to the ages of 15 to 25, trying to control everything in forms of bulimia and eating disorder, a little bit of anorexia. And when we realize that, though, then what opens up is a space for compassion. Once we're out of the red zone, we have this capacity to, number one, see ourselves differently, to go, oh, wow, I created that aspect to myself.
Yeah, I was brilliant.
Yeah, that was like a good survival mechanism. It was like, okay, I can totally have compassion for why Juicy needed to be there and that she absolutely was there to help keep me safe and keep me alive now at the day and age that I am now. And also that she's not bad or wrong. And the biggest part of this is when we've done this for ourselves, that gives us an access and opening to be able to provide it to other people, to
Mm.
create a safe space for listening, a safe space for children, loved ones, parents, colleagues, friends, that all of a sudden people aren't walking on eggshells around you. I think one of the greatest compliments any of us can receive as a human being is to have somebody say, it feels safe to be around you. Because I
Mm.
think that's something that in order for somebody else to feel safe around us, we first have the ability to provide that sense of safety and psychological safety to ourselves. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to extend that space to someone else.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question. So it's really funny, right? As your guest, I want to be the perfect guest right now. And I want to say, yes, you're right.
No,
Right.
please get
Because
it wrong. I love it when people
I
are.
no meaning like I could actually completely go into that subgroup and say the same thing as you can't really love another unless you love yourself. So yes. And that's why I'm going to hold the paradox. I was listening to Richard Rohr, the Jesuit priest, the other day, and he says the highest form of spiritual intelligence is actually being able to hold paradox. And this is what I love about him. He's a Jesuit, but has really blown away the rigidity of the Christian religion and the Christian church. So I'm going to hold the paradox right now. So so on one hand, yeah, how can you extend compassion, that kind of compassion for the darkest parts of another, if you haven't been able to do it for ourselves? And I was a therapist for many years and a healer. And I was incredible at extending the greatest compassion and presence and curiosity to hundreds of people and their darkest darkness and creating safety for them. And I was horrible with me.
Mm.
So I sit holding both truths and not needing them to have one being right or wrong, just more curiosity. You and I could probably explore that topic for the next 3 hours if we wanted to. And I think this may be important to say in this podcast, because if people are exploring consciousness with you, one of the greatest tricks of exploring consciousness is being willing to hold paradoxes and not having the answer, which is when you said to me, I had lots of different people talk about consciousness. I love that. We want to have ands, not ors, about what consciousness is and how do we work with consciousness.
I really appreciate your positive resistance there, Isabel. It's one of my favorite terms that I learned from a woman years ago named Alison Armstrong. She said, your true
Of
partners
course.
in life will offer you positive resistance. And often my favorite interviews that we do are not the ones where somebody pleasantly acquiesces throughout the whole interview and offers little platitudes, which is great. We've had many brilliant guests, and I'm not saying any have or have not done that, though I do appreciate it when people offer this positive resistance because that's what sparks and ignites conversation. I had never thought of it until right now when you said that. You're right. There are people who can hold space for other people, and I almost wonder, is it to the detriment of themselves? Is when you were doing that for your patients as well, I know you can only speak for yourself, When you were holding that space for others, did you leave those situations where
Mhm.
maybe somebody shared their deepest, darkest traumas, secrets, unveiled it to you, and then maybe help them work through it, even though you were going through your own dark night of a soul? Did you feel lighter or heavier after those sessions?
Mm, that's a great. This is what you're saying, right? It sparks conversation we could have never gone otherwise. Oh, is that too much light?
There is
The
no such thing as too much.
I know, right? Okay, I'll let the beautiful rays go above my head. I'm going to answer the question slightly indirectly. So redirect me if you want, if you
Yeah.
want that. I have worked on, I developed people pleasing, as many of us did with trauma responses as little girls. I'll speak just for girls, for years. And I just cannot believe how many years it has taken to unwind that pattern. And one of the things about the people pleasing is that we leave ourselves in order to be with the other person. So there's a leaving of self. And so I was really good at that. I could leave myself and go and be in somebody's energy field and feel their sadness and feel their darkness and feel it, and then do the thing to fix it so that they would feel better. And I did that as a child, and then I did it more skillfully as a therapist. Oh, the light. Okay, hold on. Um, and so I think that the cost for me was the leaving of self. So that's really the answer. And the reclaiming, you talk about embodiment, like to come back into embodiment, that means we do have to face our parts. We do have to face our brilliance. Hold on, I'm going to move one more time. I have a wonderful place right next door. I'm sorry about that. Hopefully your viewers will be okay with that. This is the, what do you call that? Lack of rigidity we need to have when we do this work. The embodying, coming back in the body and not always leaving in order to be empathetic with others, I think is one of the greatest skills that we can learn. And then once we're back in, how to be in connection with others without staying too deeply connected to ourselves and being closed off. So I want to restate that so I'm simpler. One is many of us leave our bodies in order to be in connection with others, right? Because we've learned that people are dangerous. Then number two, we learn to come back in, but then the danger can be we become too interconnected and we don't know how to connect with others. And then the third highest level is being connected to self and others without overly being in one or the other.
Mm. Yeah, what comes to mind as you share this, Isabel, is that idea of attachment theory. I almost saw in my mind's eye as you were sharing this. There's the one side of it where the person is so deeply over there with the other person that they're attaching to the other person and they're like siphoning off, like, oh, here, let me help you, let me save you, let me heal you. And then they go back. And when they no longer have that attachment, they feel lonely, sad, desperate, fearful. Versus the other side is, I never needed you in the first place. That super rigid boundary of, I don't need you. I've never needed you or anybody, that really disassociated sort of attachment. And then you get into, I guess, what would be considered a healthy boundary or a healthy being able to hold space where I can come and I can be with you while I'm still holding space for myself. Or I can be over here by myself and still, love you and hold space for you without needing you to call me all the time, text me, attach to me. Does that make sense? That's
It's funny. My child development master's at Tufts was in attachment theory long before anybody spoke about attachment theory. So it's funny now that it's become so popular because when I did it, nobody knew what the heck it was. It was just really coming up. I love that you brought that. And so what's interesting, and I'm wondering if you can check in with yourself. So for me, what I notice is I began with my husband, who of 39 years, with clinging,
Mm.
right? Like the first few years of our relationship, and I would cling to all the guys in college that I dated. And then I literally remember the day, it was probably 10 years into our marriage, where I said, oh my God, I don't need you. And I was so happy about that because all that need and that desire that he loved me a certain way and that he always be loving to me and that he not be in a bad mood, like that he texts me, that whatever. And then I did part two. I did the disconnected and I don't need you. I don't need anybody. I'm whole. And now I can do the balance of both. So I wonder if for many of us, we don't do one or the other, but maybe there's a healing trajectory of one to the other to get to healthy attachment. I've never thought about that.
I've never thought about that either until I literally don't even remember what comes out of my mouth when we do these shows. I just am present with what whoever we're with and being with you. And I think that's I can almost see possibly the truth in that. What made me think of it is years ago, there was a class I used to teach to corporations around the world called How to Deal with Office A-holes or Jerks. And we talked about the eight main types of jerks. And there was a whole quadrants of the gossiper and the Machiavellian and the yeller and all the different types. And we actually tied it into the three types of boundaries: porous, rigid, and healthy boundaries. So I'd be curious. That is something that I think you and I will both have to dive into a little deeper. And I would encourage each one of us to reflect because as we go into any one of these shows, it's important to remember whatever I'm saying, whoever we're speaking to, the foremost expert, Isabel and others, these are ideas, these are opinions, they are thoughts. And we invite you to develop your own consciousness around it, your own inquiry and ability to ask yourself in curiosity, does this resonate for me? Does
Mm.
this feel true for me? And if it does, I used to use this all the time when I was teaching job seekers running my first company. I'd say, try it on like a jacket. If it fits and you're like, ooh, this is snug, this is just right, then great, wear it. If not, you're like, ooh, that idea does not resonate with me. Maybe put it off to the side, revisit it at a later time. Though I would encourage each one of us to see, how does this resonate for us? Is there a grain of truth in here that can help us to elevate our own consciousness, to elevate our own conscious relationships? And Isabel, I'd love to know from you before we get into where people can connect with you at. Are there any last points that you would love to address or anything you'd like to reiterate or something maybe that I didn't get a chance to ask you that you'd
Mm.
love to leave our listeners and viewers with?
Yeah, I want to reiterate that it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. To me, it solves all this spiritual search so many of us do, this healing so many of us do, because when we really are willing to have the courage to look at ourselves, like really look at ourselves, it can be really overwhelming because there are many parts of us that were like, wait, I'm not that. No, I'm not that. I'm not selfish. I'm not unkind. I'm not judgy. And then you're like, oh, yeah, I am. So really having the compassion that it's not my fault, and then doing the work to understand, of course, they can do it with me, what the reasons are about why we become who we become in the red zone and why we become our worst selves. Like there's an actual scientific and spiritual reason, but then taking responsibility for ourselves and to really make a choice, conscious choice. Which part of me do I want to access and embody? Do I want to access and embody the red zone, the yellow zone, or the green zone? And the more we practice, the more choice we have. And so, no shame while holding responsibility is what I really hope people leave with, because there's a softening of the heart when we really get it. It's not our fault. But then there's a straightening of the body and of the posture, but it is my responsibility. I love the holding both.
Yeah, it's that dichotomy, the paradox. Can we hold and both rather than either or? That is the invitation from Isabel Tierney today. Isabel, where can people connect with you if they want to learn more about your incredible work you're doing?
Yeah, www.thefeelgoodlife.com is the easiest way to find me. What I love about going there, if you go to the start now, you'll hear me do my talk that I did at the Transformational Leadership Council, which is Jack Canfield's group that describes the methodology. So you really get to see me do a live talk about it. That was a really powerful one. I actually began the talk in the red zone and actually show the audience in the moment how to get out of the red zone into the green zone. So that it's like, even if you just watch 6 minutes of that talk, thefeelgoodlife.com. And then I'm on Facebook as Isabel Tierney and on Instagram at Isabel Tierney Therapist. I imagine you'll probably have that down, but thefeelgoodlife.com, Isabel Tierney, and Isabel Tierney Therapist for Instagram.
Thank you so much, Isabel. It's been such a pleasure. I'm so grateful Christina Wise connected us. And I'm wishing for each and every one of us, whatever parts we have, whatever darkness may be hidden within the depths of our soul, may we dance with it and may we be willing to shine the light on it So, just like the particles of dust that sometimes we can't see unless the sunlight hits it, just may we be willing to look at those particles of dust, those shadows of dirt and darkness that maybe we didn't want to see before. May we dance with them, bring them into the light, and allow them to have a space as much as any other part of us. I am
Mm,
Jennifer Cahill, and I thank you for your time.
thank you so much.